Recovering from trauma isn't easy. In fact, it can take a lifetime of gentle work. Yet all too often, I found that those suffering from trauma, even complex PTSD, expect themselves to heal easily or without any psychological support at all. Yet in real life, the journey of trauma recovery takes time, gentle effort, and loads of perseverance. Today, I'm joined by a traumatologist and author who specializes in helping others heal from trauma and complex PTSD. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I had a very difficult childhood. Both of my parents were really hard on me. My father was an alcoholic and physically abusive. My mother, who is still alive, has always been cold and critical of me. I can't get over my anger and feeling really hurt. Do you think I'm suffering from some sort of trauma? Do you have any suggestions? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you'd like further information, please see the links in the show notes. Today, I am joined by Ybe Casteleyn, an incredible psychotraumatologist and author who will help us journey through the world of trauma and healing from the pain that difficult life experiences can bring. Welcome to the podcast, Ybe. It's such a delight to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm very happy too.
Well, before we launch into this really important subject matter, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Yes, well, I'm a psychotraumatologist and I became a psychologist because of childhood trauma also. So I did my own work also.
Thank you for sharing that. It's such an important piece. I'm a big believer in how many of us come into the field having really experienced a lot of challenges, sometimes significant traumas in life, and that we bring not only our education and all of our clinical hours with us, but also that sense of really understanding how much PTSD and other forms of trauma can get into the body, mind, and spirit. So thank you for starting from that very vulnerable and real place. So could you tell us a little bit first? You're a psychotraumatologist. Could you tell us just a little bit about your work?
Yes, well, I did my studies as a psychologist. And during my work, the first years of, I was struck by the fact that so many people struggle with a lot of emotions, difficult situations, and that they had difficulty to see the link with the youth in that.
It makes perfect sense because I find this. You're in France, yes?
I'm in France.
You're in France. Here in America, I find, of course, we're all far more alike than we are different, no matter what country we're in. And I've really found that some of the people who have the most significant trauma, they are distanced from their emotions or stuck in their emotions. And they think that it's their wiring. Well, it is their wiring, but that they're wired to be that way, that it's somehow their fault and they can't switch it. Yet I agree when we slow down to start looking at how trauma gets so stuck in the body and in the mind. And if we ignore it, all of those patterns that came from being yelled at or being ignored or being physically abused, emotionally abused, a child, as you said, it's the youth, in our youth, in that really formative period, especially early childhood, although no period of childhood is free of that formation of the body, mind, and spirit. We're growing exponentially. That if we are not attuned to, and instead we are abused, ignored, overtly harmed, the psyche responds to that. The body does. So then we go into adulthood and we wonder why we aren't successful in being emotionally connected. We wonder why we're held back by these negative thoughts and beliefs that we're always going to be broken or never going to be enough. Or for some people, they don't even realize it's trauma and they're just going through life highly defended, not trusting other people, maybe even in relationships, but still not being vulnerable because they didn't learn that it was safe to be vulnerable. Could you tell us more about what you see in your work along those lines?
Well, what I see in my work is that people don't really connect to themselves in the first place, that they are not in touch with their emotions, that they are not always aware of their emotions, even. And so I think that is maybe the first step in recovering from trauma is to become aware of the emotions and to dare to explore these emotions and not only run from them. And it seems a easy thing to do, but it is not, because if you haven't learned that by growing up, it's something totally strange for a person to do. So maybe we should start there. That's what I mostly do with clients. Start to explore, to start to being in touch with the emotions in a safer way than that they are used to.
I absolutely love that you're starting from this foundational place because I agree with you completely. And I'm thinking of how I had them made, but I created them and had the artwork done. And for these cards that I call the Imperfect Love Reflection and Oracle cards, and they go through starting with your feelings, the emotions. They're different, but for the cards, I use the word feelings, and how the feelings affect your thoughts, affect your mindset, affect your energy, affect your actions. Because people often don't realize, especially if you learned that it wasn't okay to cry. It wasn't okay to feel. It wasn't okay to get angry in healthy ways. It wasn't okay to be anything but fine. You don't know what it is to have feelings. And in the American culture, we're raised often for little girls. I was raised this way: be quiet and be good. Don't stand up for yourself. Be quiet, be good. And the boys in our culture are raised to be tough, and it's okay to be angry. But anything else, nah, you've got to be tough. And if you have to feel something, get angry. And then we look at our culture and we wonder why we have people pleasing women and these tough, angry men. It's because all of the emotions that are
Yeah,
underneath. And then you add trauma to the mix. And my goodness. So I really appreciate how you brought us back to the foundational place of learning to notice your emotions. And Ybe, when we slow it down and look at the emotions, I work from the paradigm of looking at I call it 5 core emotions. And I know there are other paradigms. So I'd like to know the ones you use, the ones I work with. As when I look at the core emotions, I see them as anger, sadness, fear, disgust, and joy. What is the paradigm you work from?
I think it's mostly the same emotions. Maybe I would call disgust shame. In trauma, disgust takes often the form of shame. So, but in other ways, anger, fear. Oh, I don't, I can't recall the word. Anger, fear, and when you cry, how is it called?
When you cry, sadness.
Sadness.
Yeah.
Sadness. Yes, sadness. That are emotions that go often together with traumatic past, and
Absolutely.
people tend to want to get rid of these emotions, you know, and so they don't like to be aware of them, and they don't like to learn to regulate them. They prefer the good emotions, the lighter ones, but even those are difficult to be aware of and to regulate because emotions overall are overwhelming for them mostly.
And that's so true. And I think it's important to dive into the piece that you were talking about, that all of the emotions are important to be able to access. And often, when we learn to be okay with identifying, so many times I'll work with people and they're like, I'm fine, I'm okay. And then you say, well, how are you feeling? I'm fine, I'm okay. And you can see the pain in their face. You can see sometimes the anger, but they're saying, I'm fine, I'm okay. And so learning simply to identify the emotions at first, saying, okay, well, where in your body do you feel this? What does it feel like in your body? And it's amazing because sometimes people who didn't, I know I didn't grow, as I said, didn't grow up with being able to identify emotions. I had to learn the difference. I had to learn that sadness was different from anger and that I didn't always have to be happy. Sometimes I was joyful, sometimes I was sad. And to see in our culture in the US, I've heard many professionals call anger a negative emotion and joy a healthy,
Positive
a
one.
positive
Yeah.
emotion. And I see all of the emotions as being extremely healthy because when we learn to embrace them and identify them, it's our use of our emotions that can be healthy or unhealthy. We can get stuck in anger and throw things or abuse someone, and then it's an unhealthy use of anger. But even joy, which in this case would be happiness, if we pretend we're happy and we're not, then we're misusing happiness and we're trying to stay stuck in this sense of being positive. But underneath that can be so much pain and trauma that is just looking for a way to be heard, to be seen. So, could you say a little more when we're looking? Let's weave to the listener's question, where this individual, it sounds like they were abused by the father physically. And of course, anyone who knows what it's like to grow up with an alcoholic parent, there's loads of abuse of all different types. And then we have a mom who is still alive and has always been cold and critical. How would you guide someone into starting to identify some of their emotions and the impact of the trauma that they have obviously experienced?
Yes, well, I would start with some psychoeducation, obviously, combined maybe with some bodily exercises, because emotions can be overwhelming, especially in the mind when you begin to think about them and to analyze them. It's much more safe to explore emotions in the body first, because then you have like kind of this double awareness, thinking about them or observing them, and at the same time feeling them without being overwhelmed because you're observing them too. We call that bodily double awareness. We call that double awareness, being in the mind and in the body at the same time. Most people that don't have a good connection with their emotions are mostly in their minds. And when they are in their body, they get overwhelmed by it. It's a good thing to be at these these two places together, to do both at the same time. That gives you a safe feeling. Many people are also not very aware that emotions are stored and felt in our bodies. So you have to learn that too. When you ask someone, how do you feel? Then they mostly answer, I think I'm angry, or I think I'm sad. But sadness and angriness are not thoughts, they are feelings, and feelings are in our bodies. That's where we have to go with our awareness to the feelings in our body.
And that's so beautifully said, because I love how to know how you do this. I know when I'm working with someone like the listener who might just be getting an idea, this glimmer that, oh my goodness, I'm having trouble in my relationships, or I'm having trouble because I'm struggling with anxiety a lot. I see it surface in so many clients as pernicious anxiety, this ongoing anxiety. And the anxiety in many cases is covering all of the trauma underneath. And so I see the anxiety sometimes like boiling water, but there's all of this mess down below that feels scary to start looking at it and seeing what's there. And I often find that if I tell someone, as I was saying earlier, okay, tell me what's happening now. Okay, I'm really angry. All right, where do you find that in their body? I don't know. And I was like, okay, take a deep breath and see, can you find it is it in your heart space? Is it in your belly? Is it in your solar plexus? And sometimes is it in your throat? And often after they see me modeling, because I'll be putting my hand in various places on my body, they'll go, oh, it's in my throat. Oh, how does that feel? Oh, it feels really tight. Oh, okay. Tell me more about that tightness. And this, for some people who are experienced in body work or experienced in working with their emotions, this might sound pretty basic. But for people who have been stuck in their trauma and haven't had support, it's not basic at all. It's just like somebody who's never ridden a bike. It may look easy to people who've ridden bikes all their life, but to somebody who hasn't. And so then shame can come up because they feel like, I should know these things. When in fact, we can't know things that we were never taught. We just don't have a way of knowing it. So, how
That's
would you work with someone who is coming to you where they're so disconnected, but maybe feel anxiety? Maybe that's the only feeling they have really come, or maybe they feel like sometimes it presents as stress. I'm feeling really stressed. How would you work with them?
Well, I would start just like you do, and then maybe also get them to draw that fear. I would explore it very, very extensively, because in the exploring, sometimes can already find some regulation. If you stay with a feeling, if you are able to embrace it or to contain it, it gets regulated by itself, or it changes by itself. It's like a wave that comes and goes. And to experience that for the first time can be very healing too, to know, because it gives you this little moment of safetyness in the emotion itself. So, oh, when I explore it, when I stay with it, when I'm in touch with it, it doesn't eats me up. It changes, it moves. And so that I call exploring, observing. And only when a client is able to do that, I start maybe with exercises to regulate that emotion. For example, with breath work or with movement, things like that. And in between, because it's hard work to do, in between, I always talk about what I see and how we could interpret it, how we could analyze it, how we could explain what is happening, so that people don't shame themselves too much and begin to understand from where all these difficult emotions and this non-regulation or this dysregulation comes from. I think it's very important that people learn to feel, but also that people begin to understand what's happening to them.
Thank you, Ybe. I really appreciate how you slow it down. And I also love how you talked about being able to really stay with the emotion until you start to feel it move. And that is so true. I often, when people, clients, as you probably might happen to you, they'll say, well, do you ever get angry? Do you ever feel big emotions? Like, well, of course I do. I tend to be able to regulate them and move through them. But every once in a while, and I think of when I was learning really to manage my anger because it was new to me. I never allowed myself to feel really angry. And so anger would come up, and I learned, oh, if I let my anger there, I don't push it away, don't act on it. But I learned because I love to walk, I love to move, I love to do yoga. I would often take my anger for a walk and I'd just give it space. And sometimes I would be walking or running so fast I couldn't. It's like, oh, but as you say, it starts moving. It starts shifting. It just wants space. And sometimes I remember when my mom died or my first pet died, I was so grief stricken. I didn't know what to do with the huge sadness. And I would take my sadness for a walk or I would take it to yoga class. And there were times I would just, you know, it was just the sadness was given space and place to be, and I could feel it moving. And there were certain yoga positions, especially ones that were in the hips, right? Where, boy, that could trigger sadness. Because indeed, of course, it's stored in the body, and we're not taught to believe that. We are raised to believe that our emotions are only in our head. Yet the body research shows, we have so much research now that shows it is definitely stored in the body. And so somatic practices, as you were describing, they're so critical because if we don't start paying attention to the body, then we're healing, yes, parts of the mind in the trauma work, but we're not healing the body that is the home of who we are. We want to also take care of this beautiful home. So I appreciate how you slow it down and you talk about that. And for listeners who might think, oh, but this sounds very, very sort of like something you do with a child, the drawing and no, 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 it can be childlike, but I think that often the trauma is, goes back to that very young child. And so giving that child space or the adult space to draw, to color, to journal, to move, whatever it might be, I think that, as you're saying, gets the ball rolling. We don't always want to be diving into the mind part of it, the analytical part, because often there are so many defenses and so much judgment there that I remember years ago when I was working with juveniles on probation, where so many of them couldn't speak to me about the trauma they had endured, yet would go on walks or, I would watch them as they did their drawings. And oh my goodness, there was so much healing that took space in that way that then allowed us to move into some of the deeper work that created a lot of movement and a lot of change. And I still am in touch with some of them who are now adults, and they are living these incredibly rich lives where the trauma doesn't hold them back. Do you see?
Yeah,
Is that similar to how you were
yes,
used?
yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I would even say it's different from person to person, whether you start with a more mental exercise, analyzing what has happened to you, or if you start with the body. For some people, it's easier to find access to the body and not talk and think too much. And for other people, it's the opposite. So in therapy, it's very important to be able to adjust your interventions to the person who sits in front of you. And what struck me also in your and what you were saying is the angriness. Everybody tends to be fearful of anger, but anger is in fact a very useful emotion because it's the anger that makes us step up for ourselves, defend ourselves. Anger is not a aggressive emotion in the core. It's more like a defensive emotion, an emotion that says, "Stop! I don't want this." So anger is an emotion that's very important to use when there are issues of boundaries. When you haven't got boundaries, for example, because you didn't learn how to install boundaries because you weren't allowed to have boundaries, for example, in the case of abuse. You have to learn that. And I think that's a good example to realize that when we talk about childhood trauma and everything that you've missed, maybe in your youth, that it's very important to reinvent that or to re-educate yourself in a way. And that's why this child work is so important. Not only to acknowledge the pain in your childhood, but also to give the child in yourself the possibility to grow and to grow in a better way this time under your supervising.
That's said so beautifully, and I wholeheartedly agree on all fronts. And I'd like to lean into the piece on anger for a minute. That, for example, listeners, you might know somebody who gets angry very quickly, and that is their defense mechanism. And they're angry, 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 and stressed and angry. And that tends to be a defense mechanism, a defense against feeling the sadness that's often underneath. We call it the anger iceberg, where the anger is what's on top. It's what you see. And underneath is the sadness and the disappointment and the fear and all of those other parts, the shame, all of those pieces. And when we learn, and that's for someone where the anger is what shows, we're talking about a person where it's actually different. They may have so much anger underneath, but on the surface, it might be good, or okay, or fine. And so learning that anger is a healthy emotion. And I so agree that it is something when we learn to make friends with it, that it is such an important emotion. I'm very much aligned with you, Ybe, because I see it as a sign when I feel angry. If I track it, it almost always goes back to feeling disrespected, that my boundaries have been crossed, and I agree with you. It's like this little part of me that comes up and it plants a flag and says, no, I am not going to be disrespected. I want to be treated fairly. And when we listen to anger, to all of our emotions, for that message. They're just trying to give us messages. And when we learn to listen, then we can slow down and think about, feel, and then think when we're ready to think, what's my next best step here?
Yes, and then you are able maybe to begin to choose the behavior you want to show that is appropriate for that emotion. And
I,
if you're able to choose your behavior, then you really come more close to the person you want to be, maybe, or you are meant to be. And that is the core, I think, of the healing process, the essence of a healing process after complex trauma.
I love that you said it in such an eloquent way, because when we're not reacting and we're coming from that place that feels grounded, that feels balanced, instead of either shutting down, being a people pleaser, not saying anything, or reacting and getting cold or critical or harsh or abusive. When we slow down and choose, exactly as you said, choose the emotion and I'm parroting you here, we become the person, or more closely aligned with the person we want to be, the person we're meant to be. And for those who have experienced significant trauma, I applaud them, because that journey is not easy. I've been there. I've taken the journey. I will always be on that journey because I'm human and I'm imperfect. So I'm always going to be evolving.
Mhm.
And it is that, yet people think, and this is the message I try and get out to listeners, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 80. If you haven't done the work to heal from trauma, it does not self-heal. It festers, it gets worse, it can get stagnant. So doing this work, to me, is the most courageous work that we can ever do. Because as you're saying, Ybe, it is not easy, it is slow, but the reward is so, so wonderful, because you don't tend to see it at first. When we're doing our self-work, we don't see it. But then one day you'll be able to turn and look and go, oh, I responded to that differently. I stood up for myself gently, but I stood up for myself. And of course, it's not a linear pathway. Some days it's at one step forward and half a step back, or no steps forward. Yet when we devote our effort and don't judge ourselves, I'm thinking about the listener for a moment here, and I'm imagining this poor child, alcoholic dad, getting physically abused, cold and critical mom. And when we look to our parents, when we're young, we look to them and they're our superheroes. And we're learning who we are through their eyes. So we're being abused by dad. Mom's turning her back, essentially, or being critical. And so what is this individual left with? She's left with feeling abused, feeling like she's not worthy of love, feeling as though she is wrong, bad as a human being because she's always been criticized, and
Not good enough.
not good enough. So
Yeah.
could you say more about what you might do? Because this is not an uncommon theme, that internal voice that just feels terrible, feels broken, feels never good enough. How might you urge this individual onward?
Well, you might ask her to imagine the child just like you did a few minutes ago, and to take the child maybe on her lap and talk to it, and tell it how much love it is worth, and that it was not the fault of this child, but of, in this case, the parents that weren't able to give love. And if you are not able to give love and then the child stays, you give the child a feeling of worthlessness. uh, but this feeling is this feeling is like something that was given to you. It has nothing to do with the self-worth that every child is born with, because that's another thing I'm really convinced of, that we are not born without self-esteem. We are born as beings that are very pleased with themselves. Every baby is very pleased with himself. A baby just shouts out to the world, "Well, kiss me and give me some food and love me." It's in the interaction with the parents, mostly, or with other adults, that self-esteem is getting shattered, and you lose it. You loses it. And so it's and maybe we should add it to the first part we talk about. When you learn to really appreciate your feelings again, you find the way back to these to the self-esteem that you've lost in your youth. For example, by the anger we talked about. And then shame and unworthiness are replaced by proudness and joy for the being that you are. So it's really about reinventing yourself, and that's why it is such a long way. You cannot do that in 1 or 2 days or a few weeks or a few months. It takes a long time, just as growing up takes a long time.
And you say all of that with such compassion. And again, I'm with you wholeheartedly, because when you take that child and you do some of that inner child work, whether you're imagining that child is on your lap or you're sitting on the floor next to that child, when you go back into that, because so many people will get stuck because they don't know any differently. They get stuck in blaming their parents, blaming themselves, being resentful. And while it's definitely okay to have anger around it, getting stuck in it doesn't help any healing. And so by going into that place of nurturing that child, giving that child everything, the attention, the protection, the love, and from this adult self, when we do that from the adult self, which can feel a little funny at first, it feels,
Mhm,
we
mhm.
go back and we scoop up that child and say, hey, I'm here. I'm 45 now. I got your back. I'm going to hold you and snuggle you. And, and those are things that we can do. And at first it can feel really foreign, but that child inside, the one that was criticized, ignored, hurt, made to feel unworthy, it slowly starts waking up and trusting and responding. And I agree with you, Ybe. In my first book, Joy from Fear, I talk about joy as being this internal light within the self that I believe we are all born with. And then
Mhm.
I like to imagine that what happens is we are out in the world and we have this little votive, like the glass around the light, and people are unkind and they yell at us or they ignore us. And so soot builds up. And the soot is all of the criticism and the hatred or being ignored and told we're not worthy or shown we're not worthy. And so then we wonder, why are we sad? Why are we angry? Why? It's all the soot that is built
Mm.
up around that internal light so that we can no longer see that light, which is, as you say, kiddos, if you've ever seen an infant, they are taking center stage. They are crying, they are smiling, they are cooing, they are feeling. And then they're taught not to. They're taught in unhealthy environments to cower, to shut up, to not feel their feelings, and all of these things. So coming back and learning how to wipe off the soot through psychotherapy, through self-work, and you do this gentle work, and then the flame starts flickering. You see it more, you feel it more, you become more alive. And that is the work that you're talking about, the work of doing trauma therapy. And you've written about this. Ybe, can you tell us about your book and the work that you bring to life through your being an author?
Yes, well, I wrote a book some years ago. It is now the translation that I talk about with you, the translation in English. I didn't do it myself. I couldn't have done that. But, well, this is the book, The Healing Power of Pain. And I wrote it years ago for my clients because it takes so much time and so much effort sometimes also to explain what we are doing. Just like we do now, we talk like 20, 30 minutes, and it's difficult to grasp what this work is about. And in the book, I explain it through some case studies, through some stories of clients, stories of trauma and recovery from trauma, and I gave some psychoeducation in it and some exercises also to begin to start this work. So, and well, the feedback that I got around the book is a bit like the feedback you gave me. It's so compassionate, the book. It's touching. It's not just theory. It's real stories, real people. and people who read us tend to recognize themselves in it. I've even got some people who say they read it twice or 3 or 4 or 5 times, or they got it next to their bed to, well, before they go sleeping, they read a page or two. So, yeah, that is, of course, a joyful thing to hear. When I wrote it, I said to myself, well, Ybe, if you can help just one other person in the world, that would be already great. And now I've helped thousands. So that is pretty, how could I say that? That is pretty, it gives me a good feeling, gives me a useful feeling.
Absolutely. Because for those of us in the healing profession, that's what we want to do. That's why we're not led to this profession to make oodles of money. We're led to help people heal. And when you're able to do it, so many people can't afford psychotherapy, or they live in an area where they can't access it, or they feel ashamed to be seeing a therapist. So having a book in the privacy of their own home that they can work through. And you said something that I absolutely agree with, having exercises in the book. Because if you have a self-help book that doesn't have exercises, you're learning on a mental level, but the exercises are what promote that real growth, the self-reflection, the getting into the body, the really the making the work personal. It sounds so. Could you hold up your book one more time? So for those
Yes, of course.
watching, and so it says, The Healing Power of Pain, Trauma and Recovery Self-Help Guide. And the image on the book, listeners, is a little stick figure person, more or less, with a heart, and they're looking in the mirror, and the face that's reflecting back to them, the body has a heart in the heart space, which is that is the growth. That is the work of being able to look in the mirror and see love, to see love staring back at you, self-love staring back at you. So,
Beautifully said.
oh, and such a beautiful book. And listeners, links
Thank
to
you.
Ybe's book will be in the show notes as well. So please don't worry. If you're driving, you don't need to write it down. It will be in the show notes, easy for you to click on so you can purchase a copy. Ybe, are there any other, I know this is such a deep and complex topic. Are there any other pieces as we begin to wrap up that you would really like to focus on for our listeners or pertaining to the listener's question?
I would say that to everybody went through childhood trauma, for example, I would encourage them to read books, to look at YouTube films, to inform themselves about what trauma is and how to cope with it and how to heal from it, and to suck up the knowledge around it, and to make it useful for themselves, to dare to try to heal, to start the work.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. To dare to heal, to dare to do the self work. And listeners, if any of you have shame around trauma healing, embarrassment, or I should be better or should feel better, or let go of that and realize most people around you have been affected by some form of trauma. And if anybody judges you for doing healing work, that's on them. I personally admire every client who comes to me to do work. I admire them. I applaud them. They are my heroes because it takes work. It takes courage to do self-work. It doesn't take anything but turning your back to ignore it. And so by being able to do that work, then you become a role model for yourself. If you have kiddos or a partner, you become a role model for them. If you have coworkers, Not that you need to do it for other people. It's just as you transform, you become more of a light because you're becoming your authentic self, that amazing, free, empowered human being that you're meant to be. I get so excited about it. So, Ybe, where can our listeners find you?
Well, they can find me on my website, which is only part translated in English, but enough to read about some things about me. And they also can find me on the website of the book, which is the title, thehealingpowerofpain.com. That's in English, the website.
Well, we also have listeners throughout Europe and certainly in France. So, for those of you who speak French, you'll be able to find easy access to Ybe's work. To those of us who don't speak French or only tiny bits, then you'll find the English portion. But again, the book is translated fully into English, so very
Yeah.
accessible for those of us who speak English.
Yes, and just to correct you, I live in France, but I speak Dutch. My first language is Dutch. I speak French too, a little, but well, the original book and my original work is in Dutch.
Okay, that explains the accent. I wasn't really hearing the French accent, but now I understand.
It would definitely be worse a French accent.
Well, thank you for the correction. And it has been such a joy and a privilege to spend time with you. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for authoring such an amazing book. And thank you for joining us today, sharing your wisdom and your light with us. I'm truly, truly grateful, Ybe.
Thank you, Carla Marie.
And to our listeners, as always, I am so grateful for having you join us today. It is always such a pleasure and a deep privilege. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.